the farming game. Let's switch pipes. This one's not working. Well, so there's an inherent problem when you start looking at these roll and move games. Very few of them tend to be any good at all. And I would say this one fits in that sort of shitty category of not a lot of thinking, not a lot of good decisions that you can make, and mostly reliant on luck. So the game tries to portray, sort of the difficulties in making your way from a part-time farmer with a few acres to someone who can make their living off of that. And I think it even kind of fails in that premise to a large extent. Because early on, you're definitely hard-pressed. It's possible that you over-leverage because the game kind of asks you to, and bad luck throws you a curveball. It has to be a series of bad luck that puts you in a position where you're in a pretty lousy position. It's also possible, as we saw in the game that I played, that you get kind of stuck behind the 8 ball for a long time and not able to leverage the loans to get the kind of investment that you need, and therefore you never get big enough. And you're just, eventually you'll be able to grow, but you don't have that capability early enough, again, because of luck. The same kind of thing with if you do over-leverage and you screw up. But for the most part, there's a fair pattern. Keep a stock of money in hand, buy what you can, try to improve your total possible income. There's a few other little strategy elements that after playing it once become pretty damn apparent. Of course, I forget them. But things like concentrate, try to do one thing heavily, make deals with other players, which I totally didn't do, to exchange options so that the options to buy and also possibly actual property, so that you aren't sitting there with just with a little smattering of a couple of different crop types. Because the way the game works, there's a lot of benefits to having a lot of one type and a lot of risk to having little bits of different types of crop present. And going through the playthrough, you kind of see some of the analysis there. I think players should right off the bat be trading grain for hay with one another. Maybe exchanging some options to buy. You're not going to be able to sell anything right away. Nobody has enough cash to afford, one of those 10-acre plots. But you have enough cash to leverage 10 cows early on if you really want to, but it's risky. You're already very, very risky sitting on only $5,000 at the beginning of the game. I'm trying to think what else to talk about. Let's go to the components, and maybe I'll hit on some gameplay aspects as I touch on them. So the chart is fine. It's functional. It doesn't go out as far as maybe you'd like it to, but you can multiply things out and get them. Sometimes that can cause some confusion trying to juggle multiples in your head at the same time. The board. The board is hideous. It doesn't look that terrible in and of itself. It just looks garish and nothing pleasant about it. But it turns out that it's very difficult to discern the one important thing, which is the color of the location of a given farm and its boundaries, which is this green line here. You also don't have a way to mark who owns things on the board, the different cattle grazing areas. It just, you know, things like this red road here are, they jump out too much and appear to create divisions that aren't really there. The real divisions are these green borders of the fence line. It just wasn't well thought out graphically. I guess that's hard to do when you're sitting on a tractor. It's probably really hard to draw a map while you're sitting on a tractor, and the claim is the game was designed that way. And I think the idea there is the main ideas were. One of the things that attracted my friend to it were these color forms, which are not a great technology in and of themselves. And these particular ones, I don't know how well color forms age, but these don't even stick to the original backing sheet. They don't do a great job sticking to the board. I think they're a little shittier than color forms that I remember as a kid, but you know, who knows? This is this copy's probably 30 years old now, and I don't remember buying used color forms, so I don't know. The money is really, really shitty quality. The cards, they're okay for the time period. 90s is really, with the quantity that this claims to have put out, I don't remember how many, hundreds of thousands sold, yeah. The quality of the cards is not high enough. Consider Avalon Hill's Blackbeard, which probably came out about the same time. And Magic the Gathering's initial release came out around the same time. There were a fair number of poker quality cards being produced for games at that point. Risk, but you know, I mean, you can't really count these huge runs, but hundreds of thousands, yeah, I think you can count it up against what Avalon Hill was producing at that time. I think you can count it against the initial attempt to float games like Magic, or there was some Games Workshop stuff that came out before Magic that was actually very similar. I don't remember what it was, Battle Cards or something like that. It had similar concepts behind it. It wasn't anywhere near as in-depth a game. It was almost like playing a game of war. But the point is that already by the 90s, you could get quality cards in relatively small runs, certainly in the hundreds of thousands, that could have been better than, you know, these are not much better than the old Monopoly cards used to be. They're a little glossy, but yeah, they just don't qualify. The loans, there aren't enough bank loan money for all the players to take out their full 50,000, and there might be too many $1,000 bills. I don't know how many there are. Let's see if it tells me here, because I'd rather not count them all. No, there's no manifest. For the rules themselves, yeah, I've kind of skipped over any kind of going into the play. The rules themselves are ambiguous. They hint at things that maybe would be decent, but don't really fit in very well in terms of, I don't know. They hint at stuff like being able to make trades, etc., but then not all the rules really seem to support it. The rules seem to contradict some of the ability to wheel and deal. And then there's sort of this escape hatch of, yeah, and if you want to make up your own rules, feel free. Okay. For the various... So one of the issues that I did already bring up was the way that your crops, when you land on a harvesting space, if you have that kind of crop, you roll on here and see how much cash you can get, and then you flip one of these, which may have nothing to do with the crop you have. It's an operating expense card, and it may charge you for something else, or it may cause you problems somewhere else. It's always a cost. It may not be one that applies to you. And if it does apply to you, it could be highly variable. Sometimes they're just a hit for a straight amount of money. The worst one of those that I remember is income tax due. You pay $7,000 at the beginning of the game. You don't have $7,000. You draw that early on, you're screwed. You're in worse condition than everyone else by a long shot for the most part. There are others that are based on the acreage, and those are pretty light early in the game, but as you get further and further into the game, they get worse and worse, as you end up investing in things. And those I kind of like because you're paying based on, the amount of risk that you have in extent. There are spaces on the board that are just troublesome. The way the game plays with time disturbs the shit out of me. Now, time in a roll and move is troublesome to begin with because, hey, I rolled more than you. That means I'm moving through the year faster than you are, which means you're not really sharing the same events at the same time. And we'll go more into that a little later. But, if people in the same general region are affected by, if somebody's affected by a drought, it's probably affecting everybody in this little valley the same way, more or less. I can think of one card that does that right. Unfortunately, it's the Mount St. Helena's card, which can erupt several times during a game, and it will, because it's just in the Farmer's Fate deck, and that will get reshuffled in the course of a game. Probably twice at least, which is kind of ridiculous. If you look at the card as meaning what it says. Now, that's one of the factors with it. So the cards kind of might seem to tie to a reality at some level or another in terms of telling a nice little story or something. But when Mount St. Helena's erupts 3 times in the course of a game, your suspension of disbelief goes away, right? When you have to pay interest on your loans based on the luck of draws on the operating expenses, which may or may not make some sense. There's reasons that, you might have to pay interest on loans. Well, you might have to pay some capital on your loans. Not the interest so much, but you may have to cover capital if you're low. And take a look at, what Trump may be facing for an example of that. If you no longer look like you're holding, enough property to cover the loans that you have, the banks can call in on you. Just like a margin call in the stock market. So some things make sense that would disrupt you, but it's not just you pay the interest again. The interest is going to be based on fixed interest rates or flexible interest rates on a periodic basis, one that kind of affects everyone. There's mechanisms that you could use to avoid this in a roll and move. I've already mentioned one previous in the play. There's some game where everybody kind of collects up behind go, essentially. The only thing that I can think of that actually, the thing that I remember that does that is the game of life, where people kind of pile up somewhere, but that's just at the end of the game, while other people get to finish the game. Instead, this is one where people stop at the go type space, and here it's Christmas break or whatever. It's more clearly delineated as being a time thing because farming is seasonal, right? It's not like real estate, and it's not like fast food investments, etc. It is something that really, really is based on the seasonal trends, and everybody should be kind of facing that same seasonal reality, but it doesn't happen here. Instead, what happens here is you have a bunch of random events that generally affect one person only, and they seem like they might be things that affect a lot of people. If the weather's really hot and you're skipping ahead to the harvest period, to the, I don't remember what it is, the first cattle space, well, in a sense, that should kind of do something to everyone else too, you know? And everybody should be kind of flowing at that same level. And it's just not done here. There are cards that whip you around the board too quickly. There are cards that throw you back spaces, all of which mutates the time factor and makes that not an element, you know. So there's not a believable reality going on among the different players. It's more like you're just, you know, being hit with a series of events, which, how good or bad is that? I don't know. But the game is trying to be somewhat of a simulation of what farming under these conditions would be like. And under that, under that premise, it would only make sense to try to make the game a little bit more realistic. Now, again, it's a family-friendly type game. I don't necessarily expect it to go into all the details. But I can't say I've seen a lot of farming games, but I've seen a couple of Euros. I did Agricola more recently, but I've seen a couple of others that kind of handle farming type aspects at different periods or whatever. This is the one that is closest tied to reality out of all of the ones that I've seen. It's also older than the other ones that I've seen. So, but it kind of shows that this topic is not one that's been adequately explored. You know, you could definitely do something where there are variable market prices that maybe make your decisions as to what to plant on particular fields. Indications of market prices. Similar to certain stock games. And most importantly, similar to something like Silverton, where there's sort of a shared market that you're all going to be taking part in, and, you know, that has something to do with time. And is directly linked to it. Instead of a roll and move type atmosphere, you could have stages of time. Hey, this is your planting period, and maybe you draw a random, maybe you roll some dice to see what happens, whatever, to see how much of your field you're able to sow, you know, based on costs for laborers and equipment and all kind of stuff like that. You could make a very good simulation, I think, that wouldn't require too much depth. It wouldn't be a family roll and move type game in that case. It would be something, you know, a little bit more detailed. I haven't seen that yet, and I'm not aware of it. So yeah, one of the things I was thinking of is this is kind of to farming what like Talisman is to adventuring, you know. If you're willing to accept that kind of, hey, I just roll, move, and stuff happens type of feeling, I guess that's just fine and dandy, you know. But in the same way, it leaves me feeling like, well, I didn't have a whole lot I could do strategy-wise, and certain strategies dominate over others, probably. I can almost assure you of that. For example, you wanna leverage heavily as you can, keeping a safety margin, and you probably want to invest primarily in one crop and try to divest in other crops as much as you can within the deal making with others. Options like the tractor and the harvester, it's great to be the first one. It's probably not so hot to be the second guy with one. And if two people buy them right away, it kind of sucks. Overall, I just don't think this is that much fun of a game, you know. I look at the Talisman thing. So if you want to play something like Talisman, where it's just roll around and, you know, have things just sort of happen to you like a story, but instead of killing monsters and trying to dominate the multiverse or whatever it is you're doing in Talisman, what you want to do here is you want to try to become a farmer. If that sounds more exciting to you, that's fine, and you don't want to get into the detail where the story really means something or the simulation aspect means much. Because the story doesn't feel like it means much. It feels like it means less than in a Talisman type game. It's about the same level as Monopoly. In terms of actual play, there's not a lot of strategy. There is some room for some deal making, but the deal making is probably mutual beneficial, but it's not like Monopoly. It's not that you want to make this one huge deal and that sets you for the game. You know, it sets your position for the game. It's not like that. It's more like we can each make little trades that give us a temporary advantage. Well, possibly longer lasting, but just an incremental advantage is, I guess, the word I want to look at there. Yeah, and it's tedious and it's long. You could make it shorter, either by throwing a time limit in. Optionally, instead of 250,000, you could play to 200,000, which is what I accidentally did, because once I thought I had ended the game, I had absolutely no desire to keep going. I mean, it really overstayed its welcome. Chances are the guy who won would have won anyway. He was a fair amount ahead of everyone else by that point. It's not something that I can recommend in any sense. I know some people may feel nostalgia towards it. I can't really justify that. It might be fun while drinking. You know, that's sort of the argument. I'm trying to remember what the hell it was. There was some science fiction-y type game. It may have even been Twilight Imperium 3, where it's like, oh, but you have to have the right group of people and they all have to be in the right mood and everything. And I'm like, what, drunk? You know, I mean, that's what it feels like. Yeah, lots of stupid things can feel fun when you're, you know, in the right mood. That doesn't make them necessarily good games. And you can have that same kind of fun with games that are good, not with Agricola, where, you know, you really have to, like, concentrate on balancing and planning everything out, which just sounds like a nightmare to me no matter what. But rather, you know, with things like pitch, there's a lot of strategy to pitch, you know, bridge even. I find playing bridge while drinking a lot of fun, you know. I wouldn't want to play poker while drinking, on the other hand. That's dangerous. But anyway, yeah, this is this would be fine for sort of a light entertainment type thing, but it goes on too long. It goes on too long for that, and there's just not enough fun with it. Probably the best thing in the whole game is that it looks like it has Bill Clinton on the box. I don't know. All right, that's good enough.